Hello, and in this episode of On Meaning podcast, we are hosting the legendary Russ Roberts, which is the producer and host of one of the best podcasts I know about economics, EconTalk. Russ has been lately appointed to the President of the Shalem College, and in this episode we have been talking about the Shalem College, about liberal arts education, and why someone should go to that field instead of learning STEM. Enjoy.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.
Hello, Professor Roberts.
Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you at Shalem College. You've been lately been appointed to the president of the Shalem College here in Jerusalem. And I'd like to hear from you what brought you from the States, from your years of teaching and doing EconTalk here to Jerusalem.
Well, I'm still doing EconTalk, I'm happy to say. Every week, we're over 800 episodes now. But
You're back?
What?
You're back every week? Because my listeners were asking me to ask you, why aren't you doing more episodes?
No, I think they must be subscribing to the wrong feed. So you can delete your subscription and resubscribe if you want. But we haven't missed a week for over a decade, over 10 years.
Wow.
At least as far as I know. I could be living in an alternative universe.
News.
It's always a possibility. But it's a big change, obviously, to come here. It's a big change in every dimension. To make Aliyah, to have the job as president of a college, something I've never done before. And I came because I was asked to apply for the opportunity, for the position. And after I interviewed the leadership team here, many of the faculty, many of the students, alumni, and current students, I realized this is something I care deeply about, and it would be a great privilege and opportunity to help contribute to the organization. Listeners to EconTalk will know that I've become increasingly interested in philosophical issues, how to live a good life. Certainly, my last long book, How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life, was about how to live well and what Adam Smith could teach us about that. So these are issues that I think are at the heart of what is called liberal arts education. It's not a phrase I like. I don't like that phrase. I don't think it communicates to people. But for me, what it means is grappling with the great ideas and questions and texts of Western civilization, and here at Shalem, being in the Jewish state, also the Jewish texts of the Chumash and the Talmud. Those are all... those great books, those great texts raise questions about how to live. And those questions don't have answers necessarily. You spend your lifetime thinking about those questions and wrestling with them. And to me, to be part of that educational experience, I think of it as education as it ought to be. In English, you say it quicker. You say education as it ought to be, which means the way it should be. And education in recent decades in the United States, and I don't know about here in Israel, but in the United States, education, I think, has gotten away from its mission of educating, and it's become really a credentialing enterprise, a place where you get a stamp on your forehead that says you have passed these tests and you're now certified to be a contributor to the workplace.
Like a signaling
device, and I think that's a tragedy. It's not true in certain parts of the educational system. Certainly, people who study what is called STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, STEM, those people actually learn something real that they apply to the real world. I think the liberal arts, the study of literature, history, philosophy, these understandings, the things you learn from delving deeply into those texts, prepare you to live well and to live well with others. And I think for the world that's increasingly technological, I think it's incredibly important that there are people who are well-versed, meaning deeply immersed in these more fundamental questions, not how, but why. Not how do we get artificial intelligence to do X, Y, Z, this or that or the other, but rather, why do we want that? What does it do to us? Why should we care about this? In other words, I think to a large extent, a lot of education in our culture right now is always more, better, faster, quicker. And sometimes it's good to slow down. And I think when you study the classic work of philosophy, history, and literature, you are forced to think about these deeper questions. They change who you are. They also change who you want to be. And I think this is really the central questions of life, who you are and who you want to be. Being aware of who you are, which most of the time we are not necessarily, and then thinking about who we want to be, and thinking of our lifetime as a journey, I think is a crucial part of the human experience. And it's missed, I think, in a lot of modern education. I hope not here at Shalom. I hope it's different here.
Actually, you brought up many questions to the air. And Israel doesn't really have a tradition of liberal arts education. Like in the United States, you have like the first degree, which deals with those liberal arts spheres and the questions and the fields of knowledge. And then you're assigning to a professional school, either in business or in law or in other fields, and you are like doing your studying in where you want to go. But in Israel, we don't have this tradition. Actually, until about 30 years ago, when the colleges, the Michlalot, had been opened in Israel, so many people went to BA Klali, like a general BA, not in order to learn liberal arts, but because they didn't know what they want to learn, so they learned this. So what makes Shalem special if you compare it to other colleges or other universities in Israel?
First, I want to make a comparison in the United States. You said there's no tradition here of a liberal arts education. There's certainly a tradition in the United States, but to some extent that tradition is dying. First of all, the number of students who study the humanities, it's also sometimes called, meaning English or literature, English literature or philosophy or history. Not many students are interested in that. They're afraid they're not going to get a good job. They're afraid that they're not going to be able to contribute in the workforce. Plus, those fields have become very politicized in the United States. They've become less interested in the human experience and more interested in the illustration, say, of power, or whether power or certain identity politics can be brought to bear on these fields. And I think they've destroyed, to some extent, the value of those fields. And students aren't so interested in them when they're a political exercise rather than something I think, deeper about the human experience. So in America, the liberal arts are an endangered species. They're in trouble. Here in Israel, yes, there's no real tradition of it, and I think, understandably, most Israelis, when they come out of the army, having spent 1 or 2 gap years as well, you're doing something else, they're eager to start their career. Being able to spend 4 years deeply exploring questions of meaning, questions of the human heart, questions of, why are we here? What is our purpose? What should be our calling? These are not, it's not for everybody. Many people have a plan. They want to be a doctor. They want to be a lawyer. They want to be a coder, an engineer. Shalem is a place where you find out, you explore where you want to go. Many of our students have no idea where they want to go, and that's great. It's scary. People are worried. What am I going to do? And when I come out, what am I going to do? And when people ask me, what good is the liberal arts, for a student? I always say, well, it's really only good for one thing: thinking. That seems to be a pretty useful thing to be able to do, to be able to think and to communicate and to think clearly and to think with nuance and understand how things are connected. To me, this is a very valuable skill. And in fact, in the tech world, certainly in the United States, and I think we'll see this here also in Israel, tech companies in Silicon Valley and California are increasingly interested in liberal arts graduates, people who have a very different background, who aren't technically skilled, don't have the ability to code or do software engineering, but are thoughtful and understand how to communicate and can think about trade-offs between different aspects of a company's products and how they're perceived and used. So I think it's actually quite practical. Doesn't seem practical to study literature, philosophy, and history. But I think after you've done it in a special way that we try to do here at Shalem, of deep exploration, you get an appreciation for things that are actually quite meaningful today and not just in the past. And you can help shape the future, we hope, of both Israel and maybe outside of Israel.
It brings me to the next question, which is, what are the skills that some students learn here in Shalem? In liberal arts, usually you read, but what else?
I would make it sound like it's all they know how to do is learn how to read. Learning how to read is a great skill. How to read thoughtfully, how to read deeply. As Agnes Callard, the philosopher at the University of Chicago, says, reading is about learning how to have conversations with dead people. So you read books written by people long ago, Plato, Aristotle, Dante, Homer, Nietzsche, Shakespeare, the greatest minds of human history. Learning how to think about what they have said and how to think about what the significance is of those texts for us today, I think is a very powerful skill. So it's more than just, we call it, well, you learn how to read. A lot of people think they know how to read, but to learn how to read deeply is a very precious and important skill. I think you also learn how to ask good questions. And I think I like what the artist Picasso said about computers. He said, computers, they're only good for answers. They're not good for questions. And it's supposed to be a little bit humorous, because of course all we care about is the answers, right? But actually, many of the deepest questions, the things that we spend our lives thinking about, don't have answers. We have different ways of thinking about them, different ways of experiencing them, different ways of coping with them. There are many tensions in our intellectual life as a human being in a physical world. And dealing with those tensions is an art. And I think one of the things I think you learn about when you read about what great minds in the past have said about these deep questions is how you might come to deal with the tension between different beliefs that you have that don't go together necessarily, or different values you have that are in tension with each other. So ideally, you learn how to read. You learn how to think, meaning you learn how to ask questions about what you don't know rather than just give the answers about what you think you do know. You also, I hope, learn how to communicate, how to write well, and to tell your understanding and explore it with others, to share it with others, which is also a great skill that I think is highly undervalued in the modern world.
Do you have mostly exams or worksheets or essays?
No, we have everything, but we have a lot of papers that people write, where they bring together ideas and understanding they've had, again, in more than one place, not simply laying out, repeating something that you've learned. I think the worst kind of education is the wise person stands at the front of the room, tells the students what they already have figured out. The students write it down, and at the end of the semester, they're asked if they remember it.
And you're saying it after more than 30 years of teaching?
Yeah, I've been teaching. I taught regularly for a long, long time, over 30 years.
And you didn't teach philosophy.
I didn't teach that.
You taught economics.
I taught economics, but I didn't teach it that way. I didn't teach, here's the truth, write it down, tell me about it later. Because that technique of teaching, of lecturing, in some fields it's required. But in many, many fields, certainly in philosophy, history, literature, economics, psychology, first of all, you forget most of what you learned a few months later. The ideal course gives you a new perspective on the world. It gives you a new lens, a new hebet, a new perspective.
Hebet.
What is it?
Hebet.
Hebet. It's not hebet. Oh, hebet. It gives you a whole new perspective on the world, or it opens up an area of thinking that you were never exposed to before, and suddenly you're able to see some aspect of the world through that lens, that perspective, that hebet, and you suddenly see it differently. That's education. That's learning, and it's often done best with others as you explore a text, explore a set of questions, and try to understand what the significance of that text is in those questions. And that's the kind of learning that goes in and stays in, that works in your brain and reconfigures it in a different way. And that's the ideal that we strive for here. Can't be done in every single type of class. Certainly there's some classes that have to have lectures where you have to bring information to the students. But I like what Plutarch said. He said, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. To me, a bad class is one where the professor in the front of the room pours into the brain of the student, the vessel, the knowledge that they already have. That kind of learning has some value. That's why we read. We read to fill the vessel of the brain with information and ideas to connect those to other things. But if that's all the class is, there's a missed opportunity. There's the opportunity that should be there that we try to do here at Shalem of kindling the fire, of getting students passionate with curiosity about things they don't understand, things they don't know, and give them the tools to approach those. Those tools ideally should last for a lifetime. It's not something you take an exam on and then half an hour later or a day later or a week later, it's all forgotten, but it's okay because the whole goal was just to pass the exam. It's not what we're about here.
Yeah, actually, Pirkei Avot already does this chiluk between a vessel to be filled and the light to be kindled. As one of the great rabbis said about his students, he said, one of my students is like a vessel which doesn't lose even one drop, and one of my students is like a ma'ayan, is like a spring, which is all the time rising and rising. Beautiful. And rising, and
the goal is to create the spring. Yeah.
So actually, many of my listeners, when I told them I'm going to interview you, they were asking me to ask you a big question, which they really want the answer to. What's the ideological goal or motive to the Shalem College? Because it's quite complex, because I read most of the black books of the Shalem publication, and they have a very liberal, classic liberal, conservative point of view. They are translating the great pieces of human capabilities to Hebrew, and I'm really glad that they did it, because I think that many Israelis were influenced by the Hashas HaShachor, the black Shas, the black Gemara of Machon Shalem, and the institute that now you're leading has a different approach, it seems, by the Facebook or by looking at the publications of the LHDP, Lahatab, or looking at things like the war in Gaza, some forums with Tamar Zandberg and stuff like that.
So the answer is, on the surface, is simple, but I think it's a little more complicated. On the surface, we're a college. We're a place where ideas are open. Inquiry is open. Every idea is legitimate. Conversation should take place with respect and open-mindedness and a spirit of exploration. There's no ideology here. Of course, any one teacher can have an ideology. We're human beings. We all have certain ways of looking at the world, but it's not an ideological institution. It's a college. At the same time, in today's world, because we read Plato, because we read Aristotle, because we read Shakespeare, those are not fashionable ideas anymore in many places. In many places, those are seen as inappropriate things to be reading. So in that sense, I suppose we're something of a conservative institution. We believe in conserving the great texts and conversations of the past and continuing them into the present and into the future. But we don't have an ideology. Again, any one person who works here may have their own viewpoint, but we want it to be a place where someone of any perspective, both ideologically or religiously, is welcome and can grow. That's our ideology. It's a place of growth and exploration and discovery. So I think the Shalem Center, which preceded the college, was a conservative place. But it's not. We're not a conservative place now, but we're not a liberal place in the political left American sense.
You mean
of progressive? Progressive would be a better word. We're not a progressive place, except I hope we believe in some kind of educational progress. But other than that, and I think there's a lot of confusion about this. I think it's unfortunate, but we're a place that we welcome anyone who wants to learn here, regardless of ideology or religious identity.
I mean, most of the universities in Israel and abroad are really left-leaning or leaning towards the progressive movement. And somebody who would want to do a doctorate or would want to write a really long mass about Hayek or John Stuart Mill or maybe Burke wouldn't find some professor to guide him or to escort him during the process. And don't you think that the conservative public deserves even one college, as a haven for them to have, for not to discriminate or to not to accept anyone which is progressive by ideology, but just to be more right-leaning towards ideas that are long being forgotten?
So you probably know I did a rap video on Keynes and Hayek, right?
Yeah.
So I did two with the filmmaker John Popola. You can find them on YouTube. And in those videos, we have Keynes and Hayek arguing with each other via song about their ideas. And if you look at them, each voice gets exactly half of the time. Now, you could argue that, oh, come on, the world's so Keynesian. Surely we could produce one video that's mostly Hayek. Now, one, I don't find that so interesting. Two, I think it's more interesting to let them be in dialogue with each other. And three, I want people to come to the table to listen and explore it without bias, without, I want a better way to say it. I want anyone of any ideological stripe, of any ideology, to come and be part of this. And if it's only Hayek, they're going to say, oh, that's some conservative thing. If it's only Keynes, oh, it's some left progressive thing. So I'm a big believer in conversation. I think great education is about conversation. And I want the conversation to have all the voices. I think that's the way we learn. I think if we built a conservative college, it would be a place where conservatives could be comfortable. But it wouldn't be a very interesting college. It'd be a very boring college. People sitting around saying, yeah, you're right, you're right, you're right. Now, having said that, I don't think education is particularly ideological. I think the crucial question, in other words, I don't think there'd be you could read Burke in a left-wing or a right-wing place, in a progressive or a conservative place.
Can you?
Yes, absolutely. Now, you might be lonely as a student who respects Burke. You might worry that in certain institutions, Burke wouldn't get much respect from your fellow classmates and from the professor, and therefore you might be uncomfortable putting forward a Burkean view. As long as you're comfortable, as we are here at Shalom, in putting forward any view, regardless of ideology, I think it should be a place of comfort for people of all ideologies. And most of the time, I don't think education is an ideological enterprise. Now, having said all that, I'll tell you a funny story. After we finished the Keynes Hayek rap video, the first one, which is called Fear the Boom and Bust, after we finished that, somebody wrote me and said, this video is unfair. The song is unfair. I said, why? I said, both people get 50% of the lines.
It's unfair. Hayek is much smarter.
Well, that's a different question. That wasn't what the person was not conceding that. The person said it was unfair because Hayek got the last word. And I said, well, when you have two voices, one of them will get the last word usually. And we did choose the one that we're sympathetic to, which is Hayek.
He did live longer.
He did. That's true. He got the last word
much
anyway,
longer.
no matter what.
Yeah. He said he was sorry that Keynes wasn't alive to see that his ways of looking at economy crashes to reality.
Yeah,
he did say it.
They had a bad stretch there, the Keynesian ideas in the late 1970s when we had stagflation, and a lot of people started to question whether the Keynesian perspective was the right one. But to that listener or viewer who said that we gave Hayek the last word, I said, I'll tell you what, you make your own video. You give Hayek half the lines, you give Keynes half the lines, but then you could give Keynes the last word. I thought if we gave Keynes half the lines, I thought we were pretty fair to him. So I didn't feel like we were unfair to Keynes. But I want to make this point again because I think it's really important. Most of what goes on in a first-rate college classroom should be ideologically free of ideology. It should have no ideology. There shouldn't be any political issues surrounding Homer reading the Odyssey or the Iliad. Now, when you apply it, when you feel, what does it say about your life? Obviously, people will bring their own views to bear. And somebody of one ideology versus another might see it a different way or have something to say about it that is consistent or that is friendlier to their view of the world. But that's okay. I'm fine with that. In fact, I want to explore that with someone who doesn't see the world exactly the way I do. To me, it's a question of respect and humility. I think what makes a great educational experience is respect for the people who don't agree with you, even if it's a debate about what a poem means. Doesn't have to just be about socialism versus capitalism or Keynesian versus Hayek's approach. When you argue about what a great poem means, you're going to disagree with people. And as long as you do it with respect, I think, in humility about that you might be wrong, I think you have a great educational experience.
Yeah, usually people are really criticizing ideology in campuses, not depending how you look at Burke or how you look at Hayek, but the fact that the two of them are not being taught at all.
Right.
I mean, in most economic departments, or if you learn, if I learned law at the Hebrew U, and I never encountered the Federalist Papers. Just, one Federalist, to know what Barak is talking about in Bank HaMizrahi verdict, where he cites the Federalist Papers quite in few paragraphs. So I think that a student, a law student that hasn't been encountered in the Federalist Papers is not a good law student, and his faculty is not a good law faculty. And usually the left-leaning or right-leaning is affecting which texts are we going to learn, and which texts are going to be compulsory, and which texts are not going to be, kriyat reshut for your own mind. I was reading the Communist Manifesto in 4 different courses. It was compulsory reading, and it was like an absurd, because don't you know that you are giving it in another course?
Yeah. That's a work that I think an educated person should be aware of. They maybe should have tried to read it. Whether you need to read all of it is a different question. I will say 4 times. I feel bad for you. I think that's sad. One other thing, though, I think is worth pointing out is that there's a lot of wisdom in the human experience and in the great writings of the past. We have a very ambitious educational program here. So, somebody asked me, do our students learn Burke? We don't have a class on Burke for sure that I know of. They might hear of Burke, but we probably don't spend a lot of time reading Burke here. But that's true of a lot of great writing on both sides of the political spectrum. We have much to learn here. We only have 4 years, which seems like a very long time, I think, but it's still a reality that there's a lot of stuff that we have to learn, and it's hard to fit everything in. And we assume that people will go on in life to continue to read and learn, and some of the things they'll have to read on their own.
Could you describe the curriculum? What do you study?
Yeah, so I hope I can do that well. It may be a little challenging for me because I've only been here a few months. But basically, we have 2 years of core courses that are required that everyone takes, and they almost all take the same classes together. Certainly in the first year, I think that's true. I think it's true. So that's Plato, Aristotle, Homer, Chumash, Talmud. I'm not sure what else is in there, but for example, there's a Western literature requirement, and there's some choice there. Not everybody reads. I don't think everyone reads Dante, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, and so on. I think you can choose which Western literature class you choose to fulfill the requirement, but everybody takes Western literature.
Is it in Hebrew or English? Shakespeare?
I think in Hebrew. I think in Hebrew. I'm not 100% sure. We'll edit this out if I'm wrong. Okay, we'll check.
Okay.
I think And then we have two majors. We have philosophy and Jewish thought is one major, and we have Middle Eastern and Islamic studies as the second. The Middle Eastern and Islamic studies students learn Arabic. They read the Quran. So at any rate, we have two majors right now. We're hoping to expand that soon with a couple new majors in the next few years. But basically, our students learn 2 years of the classic, what we would call canonical, meaning the books of which there's a consensus about their greatness in both Western and Jewish contexts. And then they specialize a little bit and either go deeper into philosophy and Jewish thought or deeper into Middle Eastern and Islamic studies. So it's a deliciously peculiar place. It is not for everyone. There's a saying in America for the Marines, which is an elite group. The advertising campaign for the Marines was, we're looking for a few good men. Here at Shalom, we're looking for a few good women and men to come take on the challenge of reading these great books and ideas and talking with their classmates about them.
So, have you managed to form like 100 great canonical books of the past? Because I have tried to do it on Facebook on my own, and many people have commented, but I think that Israel would be much blessed with such a list that, a forum of big professors would sit down and try to manage to make this list.
So it'd be an interesting question. There was a thing literally called the Great Books in the United States where a group of people decided these are the books that every educated person should read and think about.
Is there a list that
there is? For a while they published those books. I think they're still in print. I don't know who published it. I think it was the University of Chicago. It came out of the University of Chicago, the Great Books. But they had a curriculum in the Great Books, meaning students studied them methodically. And it still exists. I think in print, you could work your way through those in English anyway. Certainly, Shalom Press has tried to publish a subset of those great books into Hebrew, and it would be an interesting experience to take a few of those and read them as a nation. Right? We should say an educated person, whether they're in the United States or Israel, should have read Homer. So we're going to read Homer together as a country, and we'll try to build a national conversation around this great book. I think that would be an interesting experience. I don't know if there's a good translation of Homer into Hebrew. I don't know the Iliad as well as I know the Odyssey, but the Odyssey is a book I love. There's a wonderful translation in English that came out a few years ago by Robert Fagles. There's a new translation now by Emily Watson. There are many, many old translations in English. It's constantly getting revitalized and revived in a new translation. But that would be an interesting experience. If we could have a community here in Israel, not every person probably would be interested, maybe, but a group of curious people to explore it together. Maybe it's something we can do.
So before we finish, let's do a deal. If you will form a list like this, I will do intros on most of the books in order to encourage people to read them.
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you.
It's been great talking with you.
על המשמעות, פודקאסט פילוסופי פוליטי.
היי, מקווה שנהנתם מהפרק. רציתי להזכיר לכם שכמעט בכל פרק אנחנו מעלים רשימת המלצות של ספרים, פודקאסטים, סרטים וכל מיני דברים כאלה. וכמה מאזינים מסורים ריכזו את הרשימה הזאת לתוך גוגל דוקס, והרשימה מצויה גם בטלגרם וגם בקישור שנמצא בדף פייסבוק של הפודקאסט. אז ממש מוזמנים להיכנס לשם בפעם הבאה שאתם שואלים את עצמכם מה רשימת ספרים שאתם רוצים לקרוא בכלל. כי זה בסוף המטרה של פודקאסט על המשמעות, לגרום לכם לקרוא ולהתעניין בתכנים נוספים.